Thank you for joining us today for this presentation on wild canines, presented by the Long Branch Nature Center. Today we will be talking about the different types of canines that can be found here in Arlington, in Northern Virginia, and throughout the world. Now, canines are very adaptable and versatile mammals that they can be found in environments and habitats all over the world. They can be found in forests, the Arctic, the tundra, in the deserts, swamps, and jungles. So today we'll go over how they survive, their different adaptations, and different facts, myths, and misconceptions about canines. Here in North America, the most common canines we can find are foxes, coyotes, and wolves. Although there aren't wolves here in Virginia and unfortunately throughout the US anymore, that there are some places that still do have wolves or where they've been reintroduced, but we'll get more into that later. So the term canine comes from their teeth, which are long and sharp, meant for tearing apart flesh. Now, to discuss the teeth of a canine, that here we have a diagram of a skull and the top and bottom jaws of a canine's mouth. So as you can see with the skull image on the left, that they have those long, sharp canine teeth towards the front of their mouths, which are used for grabbing and holding on to flesh. And then further back, you have your premolars and molars. Now the premolars are sharp and pointy, but start to get more flat toward the back, whereas the backmost teeth, which are the molars, are the most flat. And the reason for this variety of teeth is canines are omnivores, which is the Latin word for everything, meaning they eat both plants and meat. So yes, they are predators, that they do hunt and kill and eat things such as mice and rats and rabbits, and as well as larger prey animals such as deer, moose, elk, etc. But they also eat things like seeds, nuts, and berries, and that gives them a varied diet. So that way, in case that they don't have a successful hunt, they can resort to finding plants instead for sustenance. All right, and if we look at the diagram on the right, that you can see that the frontmost teeth are called incisors, and those are sharp chisel-like teeth that are meant for cutting and tearing through flesh. And then we have the pointy canines, which I know is kind of hard to see in a cross section, kind of like this. And then there's the premolars, and then the backmost molars. And just like us people, that they have their, well, baby or deciduous teeth as cubs or pups. And then once they are adults, if they lose a tooth again, that's it. Now to talk about canines' fur, which is integral to their survival. So looking at the picture on the left, you can see that the canines, as well as most mammals, have fur that comes in two layers. It depends on the species, of course, but the top layer, or that is also called the outer coat, which has thick, coarser hairs, which help with protecting the animal's body physically, as well as helping to provide color for camouflage. As you can see in the picture on the right, there is a wolf there in the bushes, but it's very hard to see, so I circled it. And so you can observe how those colors help it to just naturally blend into its surroundings. But now back to the picture on the left, that the next layer is also called the undercoat, which has shorter, fluffier hairs, which are meant for helping to trap or retain heat close to the animal's body, which helps to keep it warm. Now, a lot of people don't realize is that fur helps to insulate the animal's body, meaning keeping its temperature within a certain range, so that way the animal doesn't get too cold or too hot. Because in the summertime, that the fur actually helps to keep heat off the animal's body by acting as a natural umbrella. So that way heat from the air or from the sunlight doesn't reach past the fur into the animal's body. Well, not as much. So it does act as a protective layer in that sense as well. Canines are a very versatile animal with different species of canines all across the world. Now going from left to right, that to the leftmost we have the dingo, known as the wild dog of Australia. And well, they can also be found throughout some of the islands near Australia as well. And then in the middle we have the jackal, which is pretty closely related to the coyote, but they are smaller and they can be found throughout northern Africa and Asia Minor. And then to the rightmost is a hyena, which is not a canine. And I went through a good portion of my life believing that hyenas were part of the canine family, when in fact they are not. They are considered their own family, which is Hyenidae, but believe it or not, hyenas are more closely related to felines than they are canines. But as for actual canine species, that they can be found across the 6 continents in a variety of habitats, environments, temperature ranges, because of their adaptability. And as you can see with the fur of the of the dingo and jackal, that their coats help them to blend in, as we discussed in the previous slide. And they're able to regulate their temperatures to survive in either extreme heat or extreme cold. And in fact, swamp wolves, also known as red wolves, have webbed feet, kind of like a beaver, and that helps them with walking and running on the muddy soils that you'd find in a swamp. As for local canines, we have red foxes, gray foxes, and coyotes. So red foxes, as you can see, are a red or orangey color, but they can also be gray, silver, tan, or even solid black, but are still the species of red fox. But then we have gray foxes, which are, well, gray, with a reddish fringe along their underbelly and tail. And so even though both these species are foxes, they're actually not that closely related. So red foxes come from Canada, north of here, where it's much colder. So they have thick, fluffy fur, which is better for dealing with cold weather. Whereas the gray foxes are actually from South America, where it's very hot. So they have thinner fur, which is better for releasing heat. But both of them have territory right here in Virginia. And if a red and gray fox meet, they will fight, meaning they'll get territorial because they're each defending their territories from each other. But usually the red foxes are able to drive out the gray foxes because they're bigger. That the red foxes are about 10 to 12 pounds, whereas the gray foxes are only 8 to 9 pounds. But then you have coyotes, and they can be about 30 to 50 pounds, but people sometimes mistake them for wolves because of how thick and fluffy their fur is, especially in the wintertime when their fur gets even thicker. But all these animals can be found here in Arlington, and the red and gray foxes live right here in Glencarlin Park. It's where they have their dens and where they have their kits or baby foxes, whereas the coyotes just visit here. That the parks act as a green highway throughout northern Virginia in between all the city and urban areas, so they're able to travel back and forth. But typically the coyotes will go either west or south of here where there's more green space. But it is best to not put out trash at night, so that way these animals don't smell it and thus go into your backyards. Howling, the most iconic symbol of the wolf and coyote. But why do they howl? Howling, of course, is a means of communication. It's how they keep track of each other when they're out in the wild, because wolf and coyote packs stay within their own group. So when they're out traveling through the forest or their environment, it helps them with keeping track of each other's locations, but also is a warning to other packs to say that they're in the area and to stay away, so that way the packs don't cross paths and then they don't have to fight. But if you have 2 wolves howling to each other, that is mating. Whereas if you have 3 wolves howling, that is called a chorus. And then that is, again, for keeping track of each other, or they do it because they just simply enjoy it. But also, right before a hunt, that a pack will start howling like crazy, and that's kind of like a pep rally you see with sporting games, so that way they get all excited and worked up. But when they're actually on the hunt, tracking down prey, they're super quiet. So that way they're not warning their prey that they're coming. Wolves have been driven out of most of the continental US for the past 250 years. So from about the 16 to 1800s, wolves lost their habitat due to deforestation by settlers who were cutting down forests in order to build their farms, which and then the wolves would hunt those farm animals and get shot by the farmers or ranchers, which led to a severe depletion of packs throughout the US. So by the year 1850, most of the US did not have any wolves. But now, wolf populations are starting to make a comeback. So there are native wolves in northern Michigan and um, Minnesota. There's wolf populations throughout Alaska, and then in the past uh, 10 to 20 years that we've had wolves reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park, and those reintroduced packs have been thriving. And in fact, the park as a whole has been doing much better as far as ecological health, because with the wolves back in their place in the food web, that it's lowered the amount of herbivores in the park, which in turn have raised plant levels, which in turn have provided more habitat to other species. So wolves are essential to ecosystems and hopefully can continue to make progress in returning throughout the US. Are canines dangerous? I would say under normal circumstances, the answer is no, because in the wild, canines want to stay away from other animals and even people, because when they're out hunting, it's best for them to stay quiet and out of sight, and that helps to ensure a more successful hunt. Plus, smaller canines such as foxes and coyotes can be killed by larger predators such as wolves or mountain lions if they're present in a habitat. So if you're on a nature hike and you come across some canines, I would say to always stay aware of your surroundings, of their locations, and if you felt things weren't safe, if they got too close or if they were watching you too closely, then definitely just quickly but calmly leave the area. But normally, canines would stay away from people. But if there's a chance that there's pups nearby, or if that animal feels like it's being threatened itself, then there's a slim chance that they could attack as to defend themselves and, well, their packs. So again, just stay away from any wild animal to give them their space and to stay safe. But normally, canines want to be left alone and would stay away from people. However, if in the case that a canine has rabies, then that is a different situation. That some of the telltale signs of rabies is excessive drooling or foaming at the mouth, abnormal behavior such as running around in public or in circles, not seeming to be aware of their surroundings, that their fur might be dirty, or they might have bald patches that are red and bloody underneath, and that's a sign of mange, and that those animals are no longer taking care of themselves properly. So if in the case you suspect you're seeing a rabid animal, quickly and immediately get yourself out of there. And then once it's safe, call 911 or animal control, and they will send out some officers to go and rescue that animal. Are canines an important part of the ecosystem? Yes, very much so. Because as I discussed in the previous slides, that wolves and canines eat lots of herbivores, animals that eat plants. And as we see in this slide, some examples of herbivores are mice, rabbits, deer, and there's lots of other species. And as I had mentioned, that if there's too many herbivores in the ecosystem, then they eat the plants. They'll eat the stems, the flowers, the seeds. Sometimes they'll even dig up the roots. totally obliterating an area of plants potentially. So by having wolves and canines eat some of those herbivores, then that gives the plants a chance to grow. And of course, those plants provide food, shelter, and habitat to lots of other species. But what's also important is that plants also provide ground cover, meaning you have lots of smaller plants and, well, larger plants that are covering the ground. And so the roots of those plants are helping to hold the soil in place. It helps to circulate moisture and water through an ecosystem. So if an area has been eradicated of plants by herbivores, then that can cause erosion and can severely change the health and even the whole landscape of an ecosystem. But by having wolves and other canines eat those herbivores, well, that helps to keep the destruction levels much, much lower. And plus, rabbits and mice have lots and lots of babies. So even if the canines do eat lots of mice and rabbits, well, there's plenty more to come from. And as for deer, that they typically have one or maybe two babies at a time. But deer are bigger, stronger prey animals, and one deer can most likely uh, either outrun or even fight off a coyote or even a wolf. But that's why they hunt in packs, in order to take down larger prey. Wolves and sometimes coyotes often hunt in packs because they often take down prey that are much bigger and stronger than themselves, such as deer, caribou, moose, and wild boars, which are super strong. So, as I mentioned in the slide about howling, that is a way for a pack to communicate with each other when they're out preparing for a hunt. But as for the hunt itself, that the wolves and coyotes are highly coordinated, working with each other. So there's different tasks for each member of the pack to do. That they bite at the legs of the animal, the belly, the throat, or the back of the neck in order to be able to disable their prey or prevent it from fighting back and potentially hurting or killing a pack member. And then when the prey is taken down, it's interesting that the alpha wolves or the leader wolves eat first, and they get the choicest meat that has the highest nutrient value. And then next, the beta wolves eat, and then so on. And then the omega wolves, which are the lowest pack members, eat last and get the leftovers or the least nutrient-rich food. But still, it helps to keep the pack, in harmony with each other. So you have the stronger wolves leading the pack and the rest following. Can we find canines right here in Arlington? Yes, that they can be found in the parks and sometimes even people's backyards. But I always tell people, if you're out on a nature hike and you see a hole in the ground, do not stick your hand or foot into it. Just leave it alone. So some areas where a canine might make a den would be, as I just said, a hole in the ground, maybe a thicket, an area covered with thick branches and leaves to help provide shelter, maybe under a fallen log. So any of those areas could provide shelter for canines, and it's best just to stay away and leave those areas alone. But then in the wintertime, when there's snow on the ground, in areas farther north, where the snow really piles up, they can make burrows and tunnels in the snow, and it's actually pretty insulated under the snow. So yes, it's cold and frozen, but their own body heat helps to warm up the inside of the space they created in their snow dens, which can be a lot warmer than the air up above. And then that helps them with, surviving in harsher environments. But as for here in Virginia, that we do get some snow, and if there's ever the chance to go out on a nature hike and you come across seeing a fox or coyote in the forest, if you can quietly observe them, they may be out on the hunt. And oftentimes, as I just described with canines digging burrows through the snow, lots of mice and rodent species do that too. And so, as you can see in the picture on the right, the fox here is chasing down a mouse. And so a canine can hear and smell a mouse under the snow, like up to 6 feet. And what they do is they'll either dig through the snow or, well, if it's an option to watch some YouTube videos of foxes jumping through the snow, it is the funniest thing that they bound straight up into the air and then pounce down on their front paws, breaking through the snow, and that's how they get down into the rodent's burrow. And then it almost looks like they're flushing themselves down the toilet because they'll be spinning like crazy trying to catch that prey before it gets away. Can you track canines yourself? Yes. That in the wintertime when there's lots of snow on the ground, that can act as a canvas for looking for footprints in the snow, or in the warmer weather there could be prints in the mud, and you can observe to see if it's an individual, maybe a family group, or maybe even a whole pack of wolves or coyotes passing through. And then there's also traces, other things that canines leave behind, such as they might leave behind patches of their own fur that in the late winter and then late summer or fall that they shed. So they have their winter coats and, well, their summer coats. And when it's time to, well, adapt to the different seasons, their fur comes off, not in chunks, but a lot all at once. And so that extra fur might get itchy and they might scratch it off, thus taking off the chunks of fur at a time. And so that would be an interesting trace to come across. Coming across kill in the snow would be interesting, where there's fur and bones and blood and feathers in the snow. But always be on the lookout. You could also try to listen for howling in the distance, and you could try to howl back and see if they'll respond to you. Some other examples of tracks and traces is foxes will leave a straight line in the snow as to help to conserve energy by walking with one foot in front of the other. So it almost looks like someone went through the snow with a pogo stick. And then another way to tell if it's a canine footprint as opposed to a pet dog or cat is that canines, being out in the wild, running around on the forest floor, usually keep their claws and nails pretty short, whereas dogs can sometimes get overgrown nails. So if you see a print in the snow that has that, well, telltale paw print shape to it, and there's toenails marks in the snow, then that's probably a dog. Plus, dogs will run around all over the place, going back and forth across a trail, whereas wild canine would be more likely to head in a straight, well, not a straight line, but in a single direction, again, for conserving energy. And so taking pictures of the prints in the snow would help with identifying them, so you could take a look at them later. You could post them to different websites for, well, crowdsourcing, so maybe other people would have different tips for determining what species you're looking at. But here in Arlington, there's a good chance of seeing fox and coyote footprints in the snow. That a wolf footprint, as you can see, is 5 inches long. I mean, that's huge. So we wouldn't find anything like that around here. And then coyotes would be pretty similar to dogs, but again, their toenails wouldn't be as, well, likely to be seen in the snow or mud, since they keep them shorter, being out in the wild and all. But then foxes have very small footprints, similar to a cat. But looking at the shape of the prints compared to a cat, then you could tell which species it is. Thank you so much for tuning in to this presentation of wild canines. And in closing, last trace you could possibly see from a canine is its poop. And the scientific word for poop in nature is called scat. And the best way to identify if it's canine scat is partly by the shape, that if it has a pointed, tapered end to it, then that's a sign that it's canine scat. Oftentimes there's lots of fur mixed in with the scat, or it's entirely made of fur, because as you know, canines are predators and will eat meat and oftentimes swallow the fur, which they cannot digest, so that just gets passed through their system. And so if you're on a nature hike and you come across some scat, that's again a good way to identify what animal might have been there. So that's another thing to take a picture of and post online for identification. And it's gross, but it's also fun. It's just cool. But we will have more presentations coming up over the course of the summer, and then we'll have in-person presentations coming up someday soon, and we'll talk about the different species that can be found here in Arlington, in North America, well, throughout the world. That we are still here, we're doing good, and we hope to see everyone again soon. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.